It was a Friday, the 13th of October, in the year 1307. A chill autumn wind swept through Paris, carrying with it an unspoken dread. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, had set a trap, and the most powerful knights in Christendom were about to walk right into it. Driven by a gnawing greed and a mountain of debt, the king had orchestrated a betrayal so profound it would echo through history. In the early hours, royal agents fanned out across France. Their sealed orders finally opened, revealing the king's chilling decree. They were to arrest every Knight Templar, from the humblest recruit to the highest-ranking Grand Master. And so, Jacques de Molay, the venerable Grand Master himself, was seized in Paris. He stood there, a figure of stoic defiance, as the king's men surrounded him. His eyes, though filled with a silent challenge, held no fear. He knew this was more than just an arrest. It was an execution of an entire order, a calculated move by a desperate king. King Philip, his face a mask of cold resolve, watched from a distance. His voice, usually calm, now carried an edge of triumph as he declared the Templars guilty of heresy, sacrilege, and unspeakable acts. But everyone knew the real motive, their vast wealth, their legendary treasure. The Templars, who had once been the king's bankers, his protectors, and his most loyal allies, were now his biggest target. He wanted their gold, their lands, their power. News of the arrest spread like wildfire across Europe. Shock and disbelief rippled through kingdoms that had long respected and relied on the Templars. But as the full extent of their impending downfall became clear, a deeper mystery began to emerge. The king had captured the knights, but he hadn't found their fabled treasure. The immediate consequence was the Templars' capture, yes, but not the discovery of what Philip truly craved. Their strong rooms were surprisingly empty. It was a strange, almost poetic justice. A king, supposedly chosen by God, stooping to such deceit and brutality for mere earthly riches. He sought to destroy a legend, but in his hunger for gold, he would only help to forge one. The Templars, through their silence and their resilience, would ensure their legacy outlived his treachery. As the fires of persecution began to ignite, what truly mattered was not what they lost, but what they managed to hide. Where did the world's most powerful knights hide their gold? What secret did Jacques de Molay guard with his very life? The questions hung heavy in the air, a mystery spanning centuries. Before we continue this journey into history's greatest unsolved mystery, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comments below. To understand the Templars' incredible power and the treasure that vanished, we need to go back to the early 12th century. This was medieval Europe, a time defined by deep religious faith, constant warfare, and a rigid social structure. The church held immense power, and the feudal system dictated almost every aspect of life. But above all, it was an age of crusades. The Holy Land, with Jerusalem at its heart, was considered sacred by Christians, a place of pilgrimage and immense spiritual significance. However, the journey there was perilous. Bandits, harsh terrain, and hostile forces made the roads incredibly dangerous for pilgrims seeking to visit holy sites. There was a desperate need for protection, a void that would soon be filled by a new kind of warrior. It was in this chaotic but fervent environment that the Order of the Temple was born. Around 1119, a French nobleman named Hugh de Payens, along with 8 other knights, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. Their proposal was simple yet revolutionary. They would dedicate themselves to protecting Christian pilgrims on the dangerous routes to the Holy Land. These initial knights were poor, taking vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty, living a monastic life while wielding swords. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, eventually becoming known as the Knights Templar. For nearly a decade, they lived in relative obscurity, relying on donations and the generosity of the king, who granted them quarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, believed to be the site of King Solomon's temple. Their fortunes changed dramatically with the endorsement of Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential religious figures of the era. Bernard, a Cistercian abbot, championed their cause, writing a treatise praising their unique blend of monasticism and military prowess. His powerful advocacy led to their official recognition by the Church at the Council of Troyes in 1129. This formal approval was a game-changer. Suddenly, the Templars were no longer just a small band of knights. They were an official military order, directly answerable to the Pope. Donations poured in. Land, money, and recruits flocked to their banner. From these humble beginnings, the Templars evolved at an astonishing pace. They grew from simple protectors of pilgrims into a formidable military force and, perhaps more surprisingly, into an economic powerhouse. Their network spread across Europe and the Holy Land, with commanderies acting as local administrative and financial centers. They developed an innovative banking system, allowing pilgrims and crusaders to deposit money in one commandery and withdraw it in another, essentially creating the world's first system of cross-border financial transfers. This eliminated the need to carry large sums of cash, making travel safer and more efficient. They became the go-to bankers for kings, nobles, and merchants alike. They financed crusades, managed vast estates, and even built a significant fleet of ships. European monarchs, including the French king, frequently used the Templars as treasurers and lenders. By the late 13th century, the Templars were arguably the wealthiest and most influential organization in the Western world, a financial empire unparalleled in its time. This immense power and wealth, however, would eventually become their undoing. King Philip IV, the very monarch who would later orchestrate their downfall, was deeply entangled with the Templars financially. He relied on them for massive loans to fund his expensive wars against England and Flanders. The Templars, with their vast resources and efficient system, were the only ones capable of providing such sums. But as Philip's debts grew, so did his resentment. The Templars, true to their vows and their independence, were not always willing to grant his every request. There were whispers of mounting tension, of the king's increasing irritation at being beholden to an organization that, while loyal, answered to a higher authority than himself. These small signs of defiance, the refusal to grant endless loans, slowly fueled a dangerous ambition in King Philip. He coveted their wealth, not just to settle his debts, but to consolidate his own power. It was this toxic mix of dependence, debt, and desire that set the stage for the dramatic events of that fateful Friday the 13th. The relationship between the French monarchy and the Knights Templar, once a cornerstone of royal power, began to fray dramatically. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow, grinding erosion of trust and shared interest. The cracks in this alliance became more visible with every demand King Philip IV made and every Templar refusal. Philip's constant warfare was the primary driver of his financial woes. His battles against England, particularly over Gascony, and his prolonged, costly conflicts with Flanders, bled the French treasury dry. He needed money, and he needed it fast. The Templars, with their vast financial network and their central stronghold in Paris, which effectively served as the royal treasury, were his main source of funds. They held his crown jewels, managed his accounts, and provided the enormous loans required to keep his armies fighting. This strategic position, however, gave them a degree of independence that Philip, an absolute monarch, found increasingly intolerable. As his debts mounted, Philip's attempts to control the Templars' immense wealth and their unique independence grew more aggressive. He saw them not just as bankers, but as a state within a state, answerable only to the Pope. This was a direct challenge to his authority. One of his most telling moves was his attempt to become Grand Master of the Order himself. He proposed merging the Templars with the Knights Hospitaller, ostensibly to create a stronger, unified military order. His true intention, however, was clear: to gain direct control over the Templars' vast resources and eliminate their independence. The Templars, fiercely loyal to their own constitution and the Pope, flatly rejected his proposal. This refusal was a significant blow to Philip's pride and a public display of the Templars' unwavering autonomy, further fueling his resentment. Incidents of humiliation and broken promises began to accumulate. Philip's financial demands were often met with resistance or, at best, reluctant compliance from the Templars. They were an organization built on vows and principles, not simply a royal piggy bank. Their unwavering loyalty to the Pope, their direct superior, and their independence from secular rulers increasingly became a thorn in Philip's side. He saw it as insubordination, a personal affront. Whispers of his growing anger turned into veiled threats, and public slights against the order became more common. It wasn't long before Philip's advisors, ever eager to please their king, began laying the groundwork for future accusations. Slowly, subtly, rumors started to circulate. They spoke of abuses within the order, of secret rituals and heretical practices. These were not spontaneous whispers. They were carefully crafted narratives designed to undermine the Templars' reputation and erode public trust. They planted seeds of doubt about the order's piety, their loyalty, and their very legitimacy. These fabrications were crucial. They would later provide the pretext for the king's brutal actions, giving him a moral, albeit false, justification for what he was about to do. The betrayal that would unfold on that chilling Friday the 13th was not an impulsive act. It was the culmination of decades of financial dependency, intricate political maneuvering, and a deep-seated, calculated resentment. Philip's greed wasn't just for gold, it was for absolute power, and the Templars, with their wealth and independence, stood directly in his way. The stage was now set for one of history's most dramatic and tragic confrontations. The king's financial crisis, fueled by constant warfare and lavish spending, was now at a breaking point. Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, had a history of dealing with financial woes by targeting wealthy groups within his kingdom. Years before his actions against the Templars, he had expelled the Jewish population from France in 1306, seizing their assets and cancelling all debts owed to them. He followed this by persecuting Italian bankers, again confiscating their wealth. These were not isolated incidents. They established a clear pattern of a monarch willing to use extreme measures to fill his coffers, regardless of the ethical or social cost. The Templars, with their vast and largely untaxed wealth, were simply the next and most tempting target on his list. To execute his plan, Philip needed more than just financial desperation. He needed legitimacy, or at least the appearance of it. This required the cooperation, or at least the acquiescence, of the Pope. Fortunately for Philip, the papacy was in a weak and vulnerable position. Pope Clement V, a Frenchman himself, had relocated the papal seat from Rome to Avignon in 1309, placing it firmly under the influence of the French crown. This move, known as the Avignon Papacy, solidified Philip's control over the Church, essentially making the Pope a pawn in his political games. Clement V was initially reluctant to move against the powerful and revered Templars. They were, after all, a papal order answerable only to him. However, Philip's relentless pressure, combined with veiled threats and the fabrication of damning accusations, eventually wore down the Pope's resistance. Clement V, fearing for his own position and perhaps even his life, reluctantly agreed to cooperate with Philip's scheme. With the Pope neutralized, Philip set about planning the arrests with chilling precision. He understood that any warning could allow the Templars to mobilize their considerable resources, both military and financial, and perhaps even escape. Secrecy was paramount. Sealed orders were dispatched to royal officials across France with strict instructions that they were not to be opened until the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307. This ensured a coordinated, simultaneous strike, catching the Templars completely by surprise. The orders detailed the charges of heresy, sodomy, idolatry, and various other blasphemies, providing the legal pretext for their apprehension. A palpable atmospheric tension began to build in the days leading up to the arrests. Though the Templars themselves were likely unaware of the specific date of their impending doom, a general unease permeated Parisian society. Whispers of heresy and dark rumors about the Templars' secret rituals, carefully planted by Philip's agents, circulated through the streets. The king's growing paranoia and his open resentment towards the order were no secret. The cold, damp autumn air that settled over Paris in early October seemed to reflect the chilling conspiracy that was about to unfold. There was a sense of foreboding, a feeling that something monumental and terrible was about to happen. This historical narrative underscores the overwhelming power of the crown and the growing sense of injustice. The Templars, despite their immense wealth and military might, found themselves caught in a trap meticulously laid by a desperate and ruthless king. Their independence, once their strength, now made them a target. The forces arrayed against them, a powerful king, a compliant pope, and a populace swayed by rumor, pushed the limits of what even the most powerful order could withstand. The stage was now meticulously set for the dramatic events of Friday the 13th. The dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, broke cold and grey across France. As the sun began to rise, royal officials, armed with their sealed orders, sprang into action. Across the country, from bustling cities to quiet rural commanderies, Templar knights were roused from their sleep, their lives irrevocably altered in a matter of moments. The raids were synchronized with brutal efficiency. Knights who had once commanded armies and advised kings were now dragged from their beds, bewildered and disoriented. They were arrested without warning, accused of heresy, sodomy, and other shocking crimes. Confusion turned to shock, then to a dawning horror, as the full scale of Philip's betrayal became apparent. The immediate objective of the royal agents, beyond the arrests, was the Templars' legendary treasury. Everyone, especially King Philip, believed that seizing their vast wealth was the primary goal. Royal officials meticulously searched every corner of the Templar commanderies, from the Grand Temple in Paris, which also served as the royal treasury, to the smaller, more remote outposts. They expected to find vaults overflowing with gold, silver, jewels, and countless precious artifacts accumulated over 2 centuries of crusading and shrewd financial management. But what they found, to their utter bewilderment and Philip's furious disappointment, was largely empty strongrooms. In Paris, where the king had expected to find the lion's share of the Templars' wealth, the royal officials were met with a stark, cold emptiness. The vast majority of the legendary treasure was simply not there. This was the pivotal moment, the profound shift in the narrative. The Templars were captured, their leaders imprisoned, but their most valuable asset, the very thing Philip coveted most, had vanished. This was not just a failure to find money, it was a strategic defeat for the king, even in his moment of apparent victory. The disappearance of the treasure immediately sparked theories, rumors, and legends that have persisted for centuries. How could such an immense fortune, guarded by one of the most powerful military orders in history, simply vanish overnight? The most credible theories point to a swift, preemptive action by the Templars themselves. It's highly probable that they received some form of warning, a leak from within the French court or from their vast intelligence network. This warning, however brief, would have been enough for them to activate a prearranged plan to move their most precious assets. Perhaps the most enduring and romantic theory centers on the port of La Rochelle. Accounts, though often debated, suggest that just days before the arrests, 18 Templar ships, heavily laden and under the cover of darkness, sailed out of the harbour. These ships, it is believed, carried the bulk of the Order's treasure, along with important documents and perhaps even some of the knights who managed to escape the impending dragnet. Where these ships went and what they carried remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, despite his capture and the horrific torture he would endure, played a crucial role in this strategic maneuver. It is widely believed that he either orchestrated or approved the plan for the treasure's concealment. His unwavering defiance and his steadfast refusal to disclose its location, even under the most brutal interrogation, solidified his role not as a defeated leader, but as the protector of the Templars' ultimate secret. He chose to protect his order's legacy over his own life, denying Philip the true prize he sought. This single act of strategic foresight transformed the narrative from a simple tragedy of betrayal into a powerful testament of defiance. The Templars, facing their impending doom, had outsmarted the king in the most crucial aspect, denying him their wealth. They had lost their lives, their lands, and their freedom, but they had kept their most valuable asset out of their persecutors' hands. This act ensured that their legend would not be one of total defeat, but of cunning, resilience, and a secret that continues to captivate the world. The aftermath for the Templars was brutal, a chapter etched in history with blood and fire. The captured knights, including Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay, faced trials that were nothing short of a sham. Under relentless torture, many confessed to fabricated charges of heresy, idol worship, and spitting on the cross. These confessions, extracted through unimaginable pain, were then used to justify the king's actions and the church's condemnation. Yet even in their suffering, many recanted their confessions once free from the torture chambers, only to face even harsher punishments. The climax of this tragic injustice came on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, and Geoffroy de Charnay, the preceptor of Normandy, were led to the Île aux Juifs, a small island in the Seine River in Paris. Before a large crowd, they were burned at the stake. As the flames consumed him, de Molay reportedly uttered a curse, his voice rising above the crackling fire. He called upon King Philip IV and Pope Clement V to meet him before God's judgment within a year. It was a chilling declaration, a final act of defiance that sent shivers through those who witnessed it. Philip IV, the architect of this destruction, achieved an empty victory. Despite seizing Templar assets across France, his financial woes persisted. The vast, legendary treasure that had fueled his greed remained elusive. His reign continued to be plagued by economic hardship, and the moral and political fallout from his brutal suppression of the order tarnished his reputation forever. The historical irony is striking. Pope Clement V died just a month after de Molay's execution, and King Philip IV followed him to the grave within 7 months, both within the year predicted by the Grand Master's curse. Their deaths, so close to de Molay's, only amplified the legend of his final potent words. The Templars' treasure, or rather its absence, became one of history's most enduring mysteries. Rumors and theories about its hiding place flourished. Some believe it was taken to Scotland, possibly to Rosslyn Chapel, a place steeped in Templar symbolism. Others suggest it was transported to Oak Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia, a site of legendary treasure hunts. Still others point to Switzerland, believing the Templars' financial acumen led them to establish a secret banking system there. The enduring fascination and ongoing searches for the Templar gold maintain its status as a historical enigma, drawing adventurers and historians alike into its captivating web. Though the order was officially dissolved, the spirit of the Templars did not vanish. Many knights escaped the purges, finding refuge in other orders or in countries where Philip's influence was weaker. In Portugal, the Order of Christ was established, largely composed of former Templars, preserving their traditions and knowledge. Their innovations in banking, military strategy, and even navigation continued to influence Europe for centuries. The story of the Templar treasure is more than just a hunt for gold. It's a powerful reflection on wealth, power, and loyalty. The treasure, whether it was ever a single hoard or a vast network of assets, became a symbol of defiance against tyranny. It represented the Templars' ultimate refusal to surrender their integrity and their resources to a greedy king. Their physical destruction was a tragedy, but by denying their tormentor his ultimate prize, they achieved a moral victory. Their legend, built on secrecy and defiance, outlived their persecutors, echoing through centuries. The true wealth in this tale lies not in material possessions, but in the power of a secret kept, a legacy preserved, and a defiance that continues to captivate the world.